Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard. No end to the political drama in France since Sunday night. First, that record tally by the far right in European elections, the president's shock dissolution of parliament that followed. The drama's turned into a soap opera for the party of former conservative president Nicolas Sarkozy. Éric Ciotti excluded as head of Les Républicains. This after announcing an alliance with Marine Le Pen's national rally. Earlier in the day, he'd ordered staff to evacuate the party's Paris headquarters, where we can cross now to Jean-Emile Jammine. Jean-Emile, what's the latest?
Sorry, Francois. Well, the latest is that there is a storm brewing in the Les Républicains party, and that is all down to the exclusion or the expulsion of their party leader, Éric Ciotti, after those meetings today at 3 p.m., not taking place in the party headquarters. That's after he locked them. And, well, we have a response immediately from the man himself. It was on Twitter, and he says that meeting organized this afternoon was implemented in flagrant violation of our statuses as a Les Républicains party. He says that none of the decisions taken in that meeting have any legal consequences. He has threatened legal and criminal action against the party leaders, and he says he remains the president of Les Républicains elected by the members. It's not, though, a position shared by the main constituencies of his party, including one of those who might take over as leader.
The
Republicans are a family with a history, an identity and a future. I truly believe this. We represent stability, and it isn't because we're currently a minority that we can't weigh in on public debate. It was essential we make clear that our name cannot be claimed by others who don't have the legitimacy nor the right to.
Qui n'en ont ni la légitimité ni le droit.
So Annie Geneva, one of two leaders who will jointly assume the position, at least according to the Les Républicains statement, not according to Ciotti himself. She was the General Secretary of the movement, appointed by Ciotti in 2023, January last year. And now takes the position from him, trying to just steady the ship after his comments of an alliance with the national rally that was yesterday, which sparked this furious debate. And now the question of where Les Républicains stand ahead of those parliamentary elections in just under 3 weeks' time is the main question on everyone's lips. But a defiant Ciotti, nonetheless, not budging. At least that's his position so far.
And once again, Jean-Emile, the doors of the building behind you, you say, are locked right now?
Yes, this is the headquarters of Les Républicains, just a couple of feet away from the National Assembly. And at 12 p.m., Ciotti made that announcement to say that he would be closing the door. Earlier, he said that at 12 p.m. it would be locked for those who wanted to come in, the workers of Les Républicains. But he cited security issues just off the back of his comments and his alliance with the national rally, which sparked all of that dissent, at least from the ranks of his own party. And then they had the meeting just about 150 meters away in the Musée Social, the social museum, and that's where he wasn't in attendance, Ciotti, with most of the strong leaders, if you can say, of Les Républicains present. So we had the likes of Xavier Bertrand, who did speak after this meeting, saying that they need those deputies against this villainous agreement to come together. He called it a villainous agreement. Xavier Bertrand, Valérie Pécresse, the former presidential nominee for Les Républicains back in 2022, who had a failed presidential bid and then was replaced by Éric Ciotti. She came out and said there is no place for traitors or small-time putschists. Quite a direct aim at Ciotti, indeed. And then she was, it almost seemed like her word was the final nail in the coffin for his future. It was a unanimous agreement, after all, from everyone gathered there in the chamber. So now, again, the question is where the Republican Party will align itself in terms of coalition agreements. But first, they have to actually find out what the future of Ciotti is if he does take a legal challenge and how that will unfold.
Yeah, even though the party got a little over 7% in European elections, it still carries a lot of weight. We just saw images there of the president of the Senate, who's a member of Les Républicains, Gérard Larcher. Now, what is a traitorous act for some is music to the ears of Marine Le Pen's formation. Let's listen to the leader of her party in those upcoming those upcoming legislative elections, Jordan Bardella.
I'm delighted that Éric Ciotti has responded positively to this call, and I can confirm that there will be an agreement in these legislative elections between the national rally that I chair and Les Républicains, and there will be a certain number of outgoing Républicain MPs who we will support.
For the record, Jean-Emile Ciotti, he's from Nice, where his party fared 6th last Sunday in European elections, a distant 6th. What happens next?
Even the mayor of Nice has come out and blasted Ciotti for those comments now. So in his hometown of Alpines-Maritimes, where the Les Républicains had even sought to name another candidate possibly to take over him as deputy. Such is the, I wouldn't go as far as to say a civil war within the party, but certainly the fractured relationship. And so they find themselves at a crossroads, very much the soul of the party under discussion. They hardly garnered any vote at all in the European parliamentary elections, just 7.3%. That's only enough for about 6 seats. That has been a common theme, so it's not too much of a surprise with the national rally getting over 31%. And it just shows how strong the extreme right of France has become and why the question has been asked of Ciotti where he should be aligning. With half that vote was Emmanuel Macron's Renaissance bloc, at least the current ruling party of France. And so the centre movement that Macron is trying to consolidate following speeches today, at least trying to mitigate for that risk of going either extreme right or extreme left, they will be seeing if they can at least lure the more moderate parts of the right-wing Républicains. Then you've got the left-wing coalition, which looks like it might be taking off the ground. And that also puts Les Républicains just in a spot of bother in terms of knowing that if they want to make a stand, if they want to have some kind of political sway, they might very well have to choose some allies ahead of those parliamentary elections. Coalitions, very much the name of the game. Valérie Pécresse, the former president of the party, said that they weren't going to entertain either the far right or Macron's Renaissance. But the far right themselves, as Jordan Bardella mentioned, said that there was confidence that there were members of Les Républicains who would definitely be supported by his party. Then on the other side, there have been all those dissenting voices following everything that's happened with Ciotti today, who you could argue were more moderate and also might hark back memories of the likes of Gérald Darmanin, the current interior minister, or even Bruno Le Maire, the economy minister, trading places and moving to Renaissance from Les Républicains. So there is a bit of a crossover potentially, but now the questions are going to be asked in full detail, you might think, with the new leadership of Annie Genevard and François Xavier Bellamy as well, together with her leading the ship. François Xavier Bellamy, the candidate for the European parliamentary list, at least for the Republican. A lot to deliberate and just 5 days to go before campaigning starts for that parliamentary election, and we'll see where to for the Republican right-wing party.
Jean-Emile Jammine reporting live outside Les Républicains headquarters, very much from what you're describing there. The French political landscape crystallizing into those 3 distinct blocks ahead of that June 30th first round. The far left, the far right rather, a coalition of left-wing parties, and in the center, Emmanuel Macron upstaged by all the drama inside Les Républicains, what used to be France's largest party. The French president, far from staying above the fray, staging a press conference this Wednesday, making it clear he'll be hitting the campaign trail over the next 18 days. Solange Mougin has more.
Arriving to kick off a political campaign. But first, Emmanuel Macron drove home a main point, that dissolving parliament was necessary.
What would you have said to me if I stood before you on Sunday night when 50% of the French people voted for the extremes, that I'm not doing anything, that I'm not changing anything? You'd have said, he's lost touch. Everyone was saying the far right is coming in 2027, that the election will give the keys of power to Marine Le Pen. Everyone was making their own little calculations and pulling their punches. Well, no. I don't want to give the far right the keys to power in 2027.
The president made a slew of policy announcements. He plans on suspending election reforms in New Caledonia, banning cell phones and social media for young children, building 8 nuclear reactors, and launching a debate on secularism. But above all, Macron reiterated his main point, that the far-right National Rally Party is unfit to govern.
They do not have miracle answers. All that they say is, this isn't good. They're the incarnation of no. When things aren't going well, this is what we all do. We send a message and we sit down to talk and listen. But it's not because there's a messenger that party has the answers. The National Rally does not have the answers to this sense of insecurity.
Both an explanation of his dissolving of Parliament and also a pledge to win votes, Emmanuel Macron once again entered the ring of a rapid-fire campaign to try and wrest back some power in the National Assembly.
And for more, let's cross to Renaud Foucart, a senior lecturer in economics at Lancaster University. First off, your reaction hearing Macron's explanation for that shock dissolution of Parliament?
Well, Macron, I think, in a way, he has clearly a point that everyone was betting on 2027 being all but won by Marine Le Pen. So, in a way, you sort of understand that he's trying to make a gamble to say, okay, let's try something else. But then if you listen to his speech, it was a very, very long speech musing about social media, internet for young people, secularism. There was almost as if nothing happened, while at the same time there are a lot of dynamic things happening on either side of Macron. No? On the left and on the right, they're consolidating. There seem to be wind in the back. They're trying to build alliances. And he felt a little bit disarmed in between those two. And something that I find very surprising is that he pushed a lot against the far right, but at the same time, this is a very Macron expression, at the same time, he pushed a lot against the far left, saying that the far left was not part of the Republican parties, meaning that when we have these three parties final round in the next elections, it's not guaranteed that he will push to remove his candidate if they are ranked third. And that might prove to be a key in the possible victory of Marine Le Pen.
It's a 2-round system, just to remind our viewers. So we have initial polls from some institutes. I'm not sure how thorough or accurate they are, but they put Macron's party in 3rd place. Of course, that doesn't give us a clear idea of what the next parliament will look like on the evening of July 7th.
No, of course, we have no idea at the moment. And really, the key will be how many voters move. Because if voters show up and come to vote, it's very likely that then you have 3 parties in the second round. And so then, even with 40%, Le Pen can have a massive wave of new MPs. While if fewer people vote, there might be more 2-party competition. That's one thing. The second thing is, will the left call to vote for the center? Will the center call to vote for the left? And then, of course, in the most likely event of a hung parliament, it's a completely open question what happens. So in the French constitution, the president can pick a prime minister. Now, there is a long history of cohabitation. So if there is another majority, it's pretty clear that he will give the keys of the prime minister office to Jordan Bardella, to the Rassemblement National. But if it's like 35%, there is absolutely no rule set in stone. In 2022, France has shown that they had big difficulties to deal with minority government, building coalition. It's been very, very complex to do. Now, what happens if they have to build with building majorities on a case-by-case basis without an obvious leading party, or even worse, with the Rassemblement National at 40%, will the other find agreements? This is completely uncharted territory. We have no idea what happens. And I suspect none of the main parties is very clear about what will happen after the second round.
Renaud Foucart, sitting outside of France where you are right now, what are people telling you? What's the view of what's happening?
Well, I'm based in the UK, where at the moment we're expecting some sort of return to normality after almost 10 years of Brexit madness. And there's a feeling that there is a bit of a repetition of
There's
that.
a candidates debate later today.
there's a candidates debate later today, and a lot of people mention Macron's dissolution announcement as his David Cameron moment, where not knowing what to do, he decided to call for a referendum, thinking like, yeah, sure, it will sort things out. Well, clearly in the UK, it was the beginning of the end, and we went on for a long, long, long journey of rebuilding the country and rebuilding trust in political parties, rebuilding trust in institutions. And I think a lot of people are scared that the same happens to France now. I'm not sure. I think the situation is quite different. There is still a lot of hope that France can learn to deal with the new reality of not having two blocs and a clear majority. But clearly, this is a brand new world, and nobody expects anything specific at the moment.
This putting on the same plane the left and the far right, is that a winning strategy?
I think at the moment, it is, to me, a strategy that cannot be sustainable in the second round. Because if Macron is very low in the first round, he will basically disappear. So I think in some way, at the beginning, what Macron was trying to do is trying to convince people of the Social Democrats and the center-right to join with him. And I guess the center-right is not impossible, but I guess it came as a big surprise that the left, the far left, the Green, everyone seemed to have an agreement now that came very quickly, and that seemed to cancel out 2 years of complete infighting. So if I have to say any group at the moment having an advantage, a surprise advantage, it would mostly be the left. How far will it go, I'm not sure, but the left is clearly the one that are the most surprisingly organized for the first time since François Hollande's presidency.
François Hollande, who was a socialist, and you were talking earlier about the return to normality in the UK election campaign. You still have, where you are, two big tent parties that have lots of different factions in them, from moderates to hardliners. In France, the two big tent parties used to be the Socialist Party and Les Républicains. We've watched the soap opera unfold this Wednesday there. Will there ever be a return to big tent parties in France?
Well, at the moment, I think we have, for the first time in a long time in France, three big tent parties, some enlarged Front National, some enlarged socialist far left, and some big center. Two tent parties is what might happen in 3 weeks if Macron's center start to dissolve. But then you also see what happens in countries like Italy when the far right has to govern, then they have to make a lot of compromise. You've seen that Marine Le Pen has already moved back from 5 years ago on the European Union. You've seen that today Jordan Bardella announced that finally, after 2 years of shouting, they're not going to come back on the pension reform. They also have a lot of U-turns to make on a lot of policies that are conflicting with the European Union. So it's not impossible that in 5 years' time, you have a big right and a big left emerging from this election. This might be also the beginning of the end of the Macron experience. He's been destroying for 7 years the left and the right, and now it's his own center which might start to implode.
And what, return to the old system?
Well, return to the old system in a way that looks more like what most European countries look like at the moment, meaning that the right has a very strong populist right component and the left has a very strong populist left component, and maybe a more difficult time for centrists. I think this is the case in many, many countries at the moment.
And one final quick question for you, Renaud Foucart. If Jordan Bardella is going back on revoking pension reform, it's because he wants to make a deal with conservatives who were for it. Is it going to be, as an economist, are we headed for, right now France has a 5.5% of GDP, huge budget deficit. Are we headed for more uncertainty, or will the dust settle in the end?
Imagine Bardella taking the keys of Matignon on the morning after the election. There will be massive pressure on him. There will be investors betting against the French debt, meaning interest rate on the debt raising. The situation will be extremely difficult. It will be reminiscent of what happened to Liz Truss in England. At that moment, he will have to tell to the market, I'm here to reinsure you. And I guess it's part of the bet of Macron that might succeed of beating the far right, is that the moment he takes the key, if he really tries to do anything remotely controversial, he will be in huge economic trouble, meaning that he might have to choose between being reasonable and then completely disappointing his voters and maybe having another far-right party to his right emerging or some other populist left, or he would have to look like the more extreme version of the Rassemblement National of 2 years ago, and then it's this very, very dangerous situation for France.
Renaud Foucart, many thanks for joining us from the UK.